Hi, everybody. We are so excited to be doing our very first Learn More series of the year, and even more excited to have Derek Van Dyke, who is the education coordinator at Washington State Boating Program. Derek is amazing as far as resources and knowledge, really about so much in swimming. So Tasha and I wanted to have him come on, and it's really for me about dispelling this myth, right? It's the beginning of the year. I've seen so many people doing this polar bear plunge, yet as a swim safety person, I'm worried about cold water shock. So I'm just kind of curious, do you do the polar bear plunge? Like, what are your thoughts, Derek, on the cold water plunge?
Yeah, I mean, I typically do the cold water plunge every January 1st, is sort of breaking in the new year. It's fun, it's exhilarating, but from a safety standpoint, there's a big difference. It's planned. I am aware of the cold water and the impact of it, and I've done it before. And there's not a single person who's jumped off that pier or run down the boat ramp into Puget Sound, on January 1st that doesn't have that gasp reflex and that cold shock. But there's safety precautions all around, and you're planning to do it.
Okay.
It's and the other piece with that too is there's also cold water therapy. More of my friends are actually going down into Puget Sound and intentionally submersing their body in the cold water for several minutes at a time. But again, it's near shore, it's planned. And I think when we're talking from the safety standpoint, it's the unintended falling into cold water, or when you're trying to swim in that cold water. We can talk about the cold water, the effects of cold water on the body, or cold water shock, or on the muscles. But yeah, that's one of the biggest myths that we fight all the time, or we have phone calls. Hey, I jump into cold water on purpose, and it's no big deal. But when you fall off of a boat or a pier or jump off a bridge, as a lot of kids do, that the impact of that cold water is profound, and it really impedes your ability to be a swimmer.
Wow.
Absolutely. So much of it comes down to planning, right? It's it's going to be cold. There are going to be people there. It's a safe environment. We and you, Derek, I'm sure with your work, we talk about the layers of safety around water, right? There's so many layers. It can be life jackets. It can be having swimming skills. It can be having a water watcher who is checking up on you, actively watching you and making sure you're safe. And those events, or the plunges, or going with friends to submerge for those health benefits, which are really interesting. I will loop back to that because I find the cold water stuff fascinating. But it's that planned, or it's knowing it's going to be cold. I know that the other scenario you mentioned is, they've fallen off a boat or they jump off a bridge. But I feel like the other situation that can occur is people don't know it's going to be cold, and that's a big part of it too. So it's like, Seattle, it's May, it's hot outside. Oh my gosh, let's go get in the water. They jump in. Oh my gosh, it's freezing. So it's the knowledge and the preparation. So I appreciate you mentioning that, because such a critical piece of it.
Your brain then understands I'm getting ready to go into cold water. And so because your brain understands that, it doesn't freak out. I'm trying to understand a little bit of the physiology, if that's the right word, versus because I would imagine your body is somewhat doing the same thing, but it's the mental preparation prior.
I mean, I can just speak for myself there, and again, I'm no scientist, but even when I'm intending to jump in that cold water, my body still freaks out. I still gasp. I still spasm, but I'm also only in 4 or 5 feet of water. I'm not jumping in over my head, or I'm not jumping in far from shore. So again, there's so many safety mechanisms in those cold water plunges too. You're rarely doing it by yourself. There's usually people around, and in most cases, when people do formal polar plunges, there's even first aid personnel there. I know where I do it in Tacoma, there was a paramedic truck and the fire department was there just as a safety precaution. So again, that is that controlled environment, and I guess, just the truth about cold water when it comes to water safety. The other misconception out there is what is cold water. And I know a lot of the professionals that I work with in the physiology of cold water is anything below 70 degrees can be considered cold water. And that was a shocking number to me because in Washington state, it is rare that any body of water is above 70 degrees. We don't live in Florida here in Washington.
Yep.
Puget Sound is low 50s year round. Lake Washington, even when it feels sort of warmer in the summertime, it rarely gets above 70 degrees. Or if it does, it's that strata, that very top layer of water. But when you fall off of a boat, as an example, you plunge naturally down 5-6 feet, well, the water temperature can drop 10-15 degrees below that surface layer. And again, then you get that physiology of what happens with the cold water. So, and I guess we talk about stages of cold water, and this is kind of getting into the weeds a little bit, but the first thing we experience is that cold water shock, which is that gasp, where you involuntarily inhale. Well, unfortunately, when you become when you fall into cold water, that inhale can lead to drowning. Just that quickly. You inhale the water. And again, I don't know the amount of water it takes in the lungs to drown, but it's very minuscule. It's a very small amount. So you fall in. And when most people fall in the water, typically also you're falling in sort of sideways or head first. When you do the polar plunge, I don't see anybody who's not going in feet first. So again, that controlled fall versus the accidental fall. So
Sure.
you got to first get through that gasp reflex. And how do you not drown if you fall in accidentally in those first several seconds? If you inhale water, you start panicking, which is why the life jacket in that case is such an important tool, because it's going to bring you back up and keep your head above the water. Okay. And I often talk to people, like when I'm doing clinics and stuff, it's like, I don't know, when I was in high school, my younger brother used to love playing pranks on me and would kind of sneak into the bathroom and turn the shower on cold. Yeah, it's kind of what high school kids do. Well, when you're taking a warm shower and it goes to cold, you gasp. You kind of you freak out. Well, that's what happens when you fall in the water accidentally versus intentionally.
Yep.
You just have more of a panic of that cold.
That's very fair. And I remember, Tosh, you mentioning earlier that you as an athlete would do cold water to help your injuries.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's, as Derek was saying, there are so many benefits, suggested benefits out there for cold water, and it can be great for circulation, inflammation, a lot of people claim it helps with removing stress and helping with moods. So there's a lot of awesome stuff out there. And me personally, being a previous reasonably high level swimmer, I used ice baths a lot for both after training to help with inflammation, and then also during long competitions. So I would race, cool down, but then I would also get in an ice bath, and for me it felt like it helped remove additional lactic acid from my muscles. So it's that circulation, it's reducing inflammation, and it would help me feel fresh to race at my best the next day, which is why a lot of athletes choose to do it. There are plenty that choose not to, plenty that hate being that cold. I get it. It's not pleasant being in ice cold water up to your neck, but for me it felt really great, and for a lot of others it does too. But again, a controlled environment. We were in often buckets or bathtubs on the side of a pool. There's always lifeguards around. So even if you're in a lake doing a polar plunge, again, it really comes down to that controlled environment, or at least removing as many risks as possible, which even the life jacket, you might be boating in May and you might fall in, but if that's the case and we are exposing ourselves to that cold water, let's bring the life jacket in. But yes, I personally love the cold water, and it sounds like Derek does too. Shay's like, I don't know how you feel about it.
Oh, heck no. I will not. I struggle even getting into like swimming pools, like or the lake,
Mm.
I have to tiptoe in and I have to stand for a minute and then I am not the cold. You guys can have it. The other thing that I think I kind of am going back and forth or not, whether to bring it up, but Derek and I were in a meeting last week actually. And it was just one of those reminders that is not at all related necessarily to cold water plunges, but the life jacket thing and the life jacket piece. And it's almost this secret that you don't want to get out because we want everyone in life jackets. But just because you have a life jacket on does not mean it's 100% capable of saving your life. Derek, can you kind of dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, so with that, what I say with life jackets is it buys you time. Okay, a life jacket buys you time. Um, in most cold, calm water situations, wearing a life jacket, drowning is not going to be the cause of perishing. Okay, it's going to be your body shutting down from cold water. So there's those stages of cold water. So you've got cold water shock. That's sort of your stage one. But that's just a matter of the first several seconds in the water. Then you start having muscle failure. And that is where, think about what your body's job is. Your body is to keep its core warm. So when you're in cold water, all the blood from your extremities starts kind of slows down circulation. It's trying to keep your core warm. Well, that means you're not getting blood flow into your extremities, your legs and your arms. Well, it becomes really hard to swim without the muscles working in your legs and your arms. That's where you hear the stories. Or if you've been in cold water a long time, it's really hard to pull yourself out of the water because you have no strength. Okay, so that's why the life jacket is so important because you can't tread water anymore because your muscles stop working, but the life jacket keeps you up. Then you sort of your third stage is hypothermia. And that's a myth also that hypothermia kills. I mean, it can kill, it can lead to death, but hypothermia is a process that often again, it depends on the body, your body type. There's so many factors, but I typically say hypothermia starts setting in, close to 30 to an hour in the water.
Wow.
Well, if you can survive an hour in the water, there's a good chance someone's going to rescue you. But then after hypothermia, then your organs start shutting down. Then you'll get this organ failure. And that's usually, 90 minutes longer in cold water. So yeah, that can lead to death even with the life jacket on. But in almost most situations, if you can survive 30 minutes in the water, you're going, especially if you have a water watcher, you're with somebody else, you're going to get saved.
Okay.
You know, so yeah, and then if we're moving water, that's a different situation. If you're in a
Yeah.
stream or a river, we're not talking about that. Then there's other factors that can lead to death, like getting caught into a tree or a
Mm.
strainer, or getting stuck under a rock. But no, a life jacket is not foolproof. But at least in the boating world, it
Mm.
is very, very rare that we ever lose somebody who is wearing a life jacket.
That's such a powerful message. I feel like we need to just take that snippet and blast it everywhere because that's so powerful and such a good reminder. It's not perfect, but it helps a lot. What's so interesting, Derek, is when you were saying this about the cold water and we're going through those steps with the gasp and the body getting, the limbs getting heavy, my imagination is seeing icebergs in the water when you're saying this, but it's like you've already said, it's not iceberg. We're not talking about falling through ice. We're not talking about water that's just above freezing. And that is so interesting because even myself, who's fortunate to know about these risks, I'm still seeing icebergs in my head for some reason. But can you remind me, so where are you at risk? What are the temperatures?
It really, I mean, you could become hypothermic. I mean, people get hypothermia in Florida waters. It takes longer, but out in the Gulf of Mexico or in the Atlantic where, the temperature is approximately 70 degrees. You can remember hypothermia is when your body gets below a certain core temperature. So The water, any water temperature below your body's core temp is going to decrease your body temperature. The colder the water, the quicker that process happens. But as Chesney said, in cold water, jumping into a swimming pool, which is not even that cold, on a hot day, you still gasp, right? It still feels cold for the first, 10, 20, 30 seconds in the water. So you can still have that cold water gasp and that cold water shock and that reflux of swallowing water, even in water that's frankly that our Puget Sound, our lakes never get above, which they call it 60 to 65 degrees.
Yeah. And that for me, I think when you walked through the timing, Derek, of, yes, it's about 30 minutes to do the hypothermia or, to get to that level. And, we talked about the life jackets, but it is when there's no life jacket and you have the gasp and you swallow that water, this is something that can happen within seconds.
Drowning is not like with a movie show. Unfortunately, and as water safety professionals, we've all seen people film their own death in the water. Everyone's got a GoPro, the social media influencers. We had down the Columbia River a world-class professional stand-up paddler from Florida who literally filmed his drowning, and he fell off his paddleboard. He never came back up, and he drowned. It wasn't like this movie drowning. It happened really quickly. And this was a world-class athlete, who was used to Florida water and was here doing an event in Washington. And, the Columbia River is cold. So again, drowning is quick. Drowning is not splashing. Drowning, in many cases, you fall under the water and they don't come back up.
Yeah. No, it's always such a challenge, I think, with our work. You don't want to scare people. I don't want people to look away. I think we've done a good job of saying, hey, let's get everyone swimming. Let's, look into water safety. But every now and then you have to be reminded of the harsh reality that this is something that happens to world-class swimmers. I always think of Drennan, who, was on the high school swim team, even the woman in the Olympics, remember, that fell underwater, that one of those epic pictures from last year. It happened to people that are very, very, skilled in water. And so those of us that are less skilled have even more of a risk. So again, I just appreciate having resources like you, Derek, that I always learn from and just am able to lean in and say, wait a minute, or gosh, good reminder, because it's one of those activities you go, you have fun. It's not top of mind. And that's what I think needs to shift.
Yeah, one of my good friends who works in the water safe professional, he always talks about, water it's a foreign environment to us. Astronauts would never think of walking out on the moon, or as we look at Mars, expanding into Mars, we would never step out of that capsule not wearing safety equipment because it's a foreign environment. Well, just below the water is that same foreign environment. It's no different than going on the moon. Without we can't breathe underwater. We have to stay above water. And the cold water makes it harder to stay above water. And I guess the final thing, I want to add to it is, I am not a strong swimmer. I'll fully admit that. My idea of swimming is, well, I'm a weak swimmer, but I'm a great floater. Okay. And oftentimes I'm a great floater because I'm wearing a life jacket. I understand my limitations. But sometimes the strongest swimmers are the ones that get in trouble in cold water because they're at the lake and they see that floating dock, it's 100 yards out from the lake, and I'm going to swim to it. Well, they get halfway there and they cramp up, or it's colder than they expected. They're used to swimming 100 meters in a pool. Well, 100 meters in a pool is completely different than 100 meters in open water in a cold lake. Now, if you train as an open water swimmer, you're used to it. But, how many people train as open water swimmers. Frankly, how many people train as swimmers? Not that many. You know, the recreational swimmer, we go out there, we jump off the dock, we float around, we swim back, right? So just being aware of what your limitations are, and that the cold water makes it so much harder to swim. You know, so both my kids were competitive swimmers, and in watching them in cold water, you know, it's their overconfidence because they can do it in the pool. Well, that doesn't always correlate to the open water, to the lake or the Puget Sound environment. I would like to end with that. So knowing your abilities and being honest about your abilities.
And then knowing that the abilities don't matter so much in the cold anyway.
Correct.
There you go, Tosh. There you go. I love it.
Yeah.
Derek, thank you so much for just all that you do in Washington State, like first and foremost, and also for taking the time to talk to us today. We really appreciate your knowledge and, you know, just willingness to share. So
So much.
all right. And
We appreciate your work, Derek. Thank you so much.